Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, or morning, where whatever time this is being shown. Welcome to geometry for the week. This week, we are going to build off of our knowledge of trig. Last week, we talked about the three main trigonomic ratios, but we didn't really talk about how we could figure out which one to use in a given situation. Today, our goal is going to be we are going to evaluate problems to decide which trig ratio to use for a given case. We are going to start on your slide that's mostly blank and says trig ratio review. What I want you to do to start is we're going to start just by drawing our base right triangle. Our base right triangle, we're just going to draw a nice simple right triangle. Make sure we label that angle real nice. And then we can label each one of our points A, B, and C. And then we can label our sides little a, little c, and little b. Okay. As a reminder, our side, our longest side of the triangle, the side labeled B, is called our hypotenuse. And for the purposes of our diagram, we're going to be considering angle A as our main angle. We can classify our two legs based off of their position to angle A. Side A, since it is across from our angle, is our opposite leg. And side C, since it's next to our angle, is the adjacent leg. Our two legs are opposite and adjacent. And the longest piece of all, the hypotenuse. We had three trig ratios, and they all were very similar. Our three trig ratios were sine, cosine, and tangent. All three of these had a couple things in common. First and foremost, they all had sine or cosine or tangent of an angle. We had an angle in parentheses. Second, they all had a fraction after the equal sign. Sine's fraction was opposite divided by hypotenuse. Cosine's was adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And tangents was opposite divided by adjacent. Three ratios, three formulas. If we looked at our diagram, we could fill these in saying something like sine of A is equal, our opposite side of angle A is little a over the hypotenuse is B. Sine of A equals A over B. For cosine, our equation would be cosine of A equals our adjacent side would be C, and our hypotenuse would be B. Cosine of A equals C over B. And then our final one, tangent. Tangent of A equals our opposite side, A, divided by our adjacent side, C. Okay. If you want to pause the video at this point so you can finish writing down your notes, please pause the video here. Okay. Hopefully by this point, everyone has their notes written down nicely. Let's go ahead and let's move on to our next slide. Now that we have reviewed our three trig ratios, we need to start talking about how can we tell which trig ratio we should use first. We can kind of break this down into a three-step process. Step number one, the first thing you're going to want to identify is your angle. Identify your angle first. Without the angle, you're not going to be able to have a reference point. Without a reference point, your words opposite and adjacent have no meaning. Our thought here, this gives a reference point. Okay. You found your angle. Step 2 and 3, these are going to be spots for you to essentially just kind of check. The first check I would run is check to see if you have your hypotenuse. Look at your diagram and go, okay, is the hypotenuse there? The reason I want to check for the hypotenuse is because it lets us make a really quick jump in most cases. If we have the hypotenuse, then we can move to the next step. If you don't have the hypotenuse, we are guaranteed to be using tangent or tan. Tangent is the only ratio without the hypotenuse. So if you're not given the hypotenuse, you can skip step 3 and you can just go straight to tangent. Let's say you do have the hypotenuse. Then you're going to have to deal with some of the vocab. You need to check, do you have the opposite side? Or do you have the adjacent side? If you have the opposite side, you're going to use sine. If you have the adjacent side, you're going to use cosine. Okay. Hopefully you have your formulas handy. We're going to go ahead and we're going to work a couple of examples here. At this point, pause the video so you can finish writing your notes. Okay, we're going to work 3 practice problems today. We are going to start by working practice problem number 1 on your sheet of paper. Practice problem number 1. Let's look at problem number 1. We're given our triangle and we're given 3 pieces, C, 7, and 17. First thing we want to identify is our angle. Looking at our triangle, if you remember back to last week, the angle is a lot of the time a number inside your triangle. We only have one number inside our triangle, that number being 17. I always mark my angle so we can come back and look at it later. But for now, let's record your angle is 17. Okay, let's move to step 2. Step 2 told us to check to see if we have the hypotenuse. Our hypotenuse is that longest side. So as we look at our triangle, we notice that our longest side is this top piece right here. We know nothing about it. No hypotenuse. Since we have no hypotenuse, we can immediately know we need to use tangent. Now that we know we can use tangent, let's set up the rest of our table like we have in the past. We know we need an opposite side and adjacent side. Opposite means across. So which one of our sides is across from the angle 17? That would be side C, leaving our only option for adjacent to be 7. Let's set up our formula. Tangent of your angle equals opposite divided by adjacent. Feel free to use your formula sheets for these. I'm totally okay with that. Filling in our blanks, tangent of 17 equals, our opposite side is C, and our adjacent side is 7. Okay. Now we need to get our variable by itself. If you remember back to last week, when we had a number on the bottom of our equation, we could get rid of that number by multiplying both sides by it. So our number was 7. We're going to multiply both sides by 7. Those are going to cancel. We're going to be left with C equals 7 times tangent 17. Okay. Now that we've gone this far, hopefully everyone has a calculator today. Let's put this into the calculator. 7 times, don't forget your tangent button is a couple above the 9, tangent 17. And times tangent 17. Close your parentheses and hit equals or enter, and it will give you a whole mess of decimals, which we can cut off at C equals 2.14. We're not really worrying about rounding here. We're just going to go ahead and cut it off. Okay. There's problem number 1. Let's start looking at problem number 3, our next issue, our next one. Just like before, we are given our angle, or we're given an angle, and we're given 2 sides. First things first, let's figure out what our angle is. Our angle is usually going to be one of the numbers inside the triangle. In this case, our angle is 21 degrees. Now, let's look what we're given. Step number 2 in our process told us to check for the hypotenuse. Which one of our, do we know anything about our hypotenuse? Looking at our problem, we notice that we are given the length of the hypotenuse. So we can make a note, our hypotenuse is G. Okay. Now that we have the hypotenuse, we need to move to step 3. Do we have the opposite side or the adjacent side? We know that the other piece we're given is across the diagram from our angle. Since we have to move across the diagram and it's not right next to our angle, we are given the opposite side. So we can make a note that the opposite side is 18. Okay. Now what you need to do is let's look at our formulas and let's figure out which one of our trig ratios uses the opposite side and the hypotenuse. Or we can even look at step 3. Since we were given the opposite side, we know that we need to use sine. So let's write our equation. Sine of my angle equals opposite divided by hypotenuse. Sine of my angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. Let's fill in the blanks. Sine of 21 equals, my opposite side is 18 over my hypotenuse of G. Notice this time our letter is in the bottom. Last week, we talked about a trick we could use for that. What we can do is we can take our part on the left side of the equation and our letter, and they're going to swap places. So my equation would become G equals 18 over sine 21. Y'all already know what happens next. Let's plug it into the calculator. 18. Fraction bar tells us we're going to use division. So we'll type in 18 divided by sine 21. Close your parentheses and hit equal. We're going to get G equals 50.22. Again, you don't need the whole thing. You can just cut it off after 2 spots. And there would be our answer. Okay. At this point, you can go ahead and pause the video. And if you would like to take a picture, feel free, or finish taking notes. Now would be the time to do it. Okay. Let's move on to our last example for today. Our last example is example number 5. Looking at number 5, we are given an angle and we're given 2 sides. What would our angle be for number 5? Take a second and write it on your paper. If you said that our angle was 66 degrees, great job. Now, step number 2 in our process told us to check for the hypotenuse. I want you to take a second looking at your image and decide, do we have the hypotenuse or not? Okay. We know that our hypotenuse is the longest side. So in this case, it is our slanted edge. We have no hypotenuse. So that immediately lets us know we want to use tangent. Let's fill out the rest of our problem. We know tangent uses the opposite and the adjacent sides. Which side is opposite of our 66? The side opposite 66 would be 26, and my adjacent side would be R. Now that we have our chunks, let's go ahead and plug them into our formula. Tangent of an angle is equal to opposite over adjacent. Plugging in, we would get tangent of 66 equals, our opposite side is 26, and our adjacent side is R. Now that we're in this position, let's go ahead and let's solve our problem. Our letter is in the bottom, so we can employ the same trick we did in the last example. We can switch our chunks around. When we do that, we get R equals 26 divided by tangent 66. Okay. We've done all the hard work. Now let's let the calculator take it from here. 26 divided by tangent 66. Close up those parentheses. You will get an answer of R equals 11.57. There we go. Box that up and you're done. Okay, group. For the rest of class today, if you flip your sheet over, there are going to be 10 practice problems. We have already done problems 1, 3, and 5. Your job if you would like full points for today, is to choose 3 of the problems on there that we have not done and to solve them. My ask is that you try and solve at least 3 with at least 2 different trig ratios. So that really hammers in, you know which trig ratios you need to use. Once you are finished, you can either turn in your paper on my back desk, or you can submit a picture of your image on Canvas. Just please be sure that you put your name on your note sheet. Tomorrow, we'll have another video lesson. So hopefully this format worked for you. If you need anything, please feel free to shoot me an email and I will try to respond to it whenever I have time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all when I get back on next Monday. Have a great day.